This account will serve as my confession, my warning, and maybe, if someone out there is listening, my plea for forgiveness. I never meant for any of this to happen. But then again, does anyone? My name is Daniel Sullivan, and 6 months ago, I had everything a man could want. A corner office on the 47th floor of Chicago's Merchandise Mart. A beautiful wife who still looked at me the same way she did when we met in college. And a 6-year-old daughter whose smile could light up even the darkest day. We lived in a lakefront condo that cost more than my parents' house, drove matching BMW sedans, and spent our summers in a cottage in Door County. The American dream, served with a side of craft beer and artisanal cheese. Then came the audit. It started small, like these things always do. A few bets on football games, nothing serious. But gambling has a way of growing, of consuming you from the inside out. Soon, I was placing bets on anything I could find. Baseball, basketball, horse racing. When I lost, I'd bet double to win it back. When I won, I'd bet more, chasing that high. I started borrowing from client accounts. Just temporary transfers, I told myself. I'd win it back and replace the money before anyone noticed. But someone did notice. The compliance department found discrepancies in my accounts during a routine audit. Over $2 million worth of discrepancies. Sandra left me 2 weeks after the indictment. I came home from a meeting with my lawyer to find her wedding ring on the kitchen counter, next to a note that read, "I can't do this anymore. Emma needs at least one parent she can look up to." My lawyer managed to keep me out of prison. Barely. The plea deal left me broke and unemployable in finance, but at least I wasn't wearing orange. I spent 3 months sleeping in my truck, taking odd jobs just to afford enough gas to keep moving. That's when I found the listing on one of those obscure job boards that pop up when you're desperate enough to click past the first page of Google results. Night desk clerk needed. Blue Swallow Motel, Route 66, New Mexico, $50 per hour, cash. No questions asked. Must be willing to work alone. Must follow all posted rules. Immediate start available. I should have known better. In my old life, I would have scrolled right past anything that seemed too good to be true. But 3 months of truck stop showers and gas station coffee have a way of wearing down your skepticism. Besides, I was 3 months behind on child support, and Sandra's lawyer was making threatening noises about court action. So I pointed my beat-up Ford F-150 toward New Mexico, watching the Midwest fade into plains into desert through a cracked windshield. The radio kept cutting out, picking up fragments of old country songs and fire and brimstone preachers warning about the wages of sin. If only I'd listened more carefully to those warnings. The sun was setting when I finally spotted the sign, a massive neon bird swooping over block letters that spelled out Blue Swallow Motel. The word vacancy pulsed beneath it like a nervous tick. The whole thing looked like it had been transported straight from a 1950s postcard, though the neon flickered in a way that made my eyes hurt if I looked too long. The motel itself sprawled across several acres of desert, its buildings arranged in a horseshoe pattern around a central courtyard. The architecture was pure Americana. Adobe walls painted a faded turquoise, with red trim that had seen better days. Classic cars dotted the parking lot like mechanical fossils, including a rusted 1967 Pontiac GTO that seemed to have taken root near the office. I pulled my truck into an empty spot, wincing at the way the suspension groaned over a pothole. The dashboard clock read 6:43 p.m., but something about the light made it feel later. The air was thick with that peculiar desert stillness that comes just before nightfall, when even the wind seems to hold its breath. The office door creaked when I pushed it open, and a small brass bell announced my arrival with a discordant jingle that seemed to hang in the air too long. The interior smelled like old books and cigarette smoke, with undertones of something else. Something sickly sweet that reminded me of the funeral home where we held my father's wake. "Hello?" I called out. My voice seemed to die in the stale air, absorbed by the dark wood paneling that lined the walls. No answer. The front desk was a relic, all dark wood and brass fixtures. A shoebox full of old postcards sat next to a massive leather-bound guest ledger that looked like it hadn't been updated since the Carter administration. An ancient oscillating fan clicked back and forth overhead, stirring dust motes in the dying sunlight that filtered through Venetian blinds. I checked my phone. No signal. Of course. The first postcard caught my eye immediately. It lay on the desk as if placed there deliberately, its edges yellow and curling with age. The handwriting was shaky but deliberate, like someone had written it while trying to keep their hand from trembling. Rule 1. Keep the neon vacancy sign off after midnight. The neon flickers. It attracts things that shouldn't stop by. I laughed nervously, thinking it must be some kind of joke. But then I saw another postcard, and another. Each one made my throat a little tighter. Rule 2. Don't touch personal belongings left behind by guests. Some of those things don't belong to them anymore, and they won't belong to you either. Rule 3. If a guest asks you to lock them in, do it without question. They know what's out there better than you do. Rule 4. Leave the front desk by 3:13 a.m. No exceptions. You don't want to be here when the lights flicker again. Rule 5. Ignore animal noises from the parking lot. Coyotes shouldn't sound like children crying. Rule 6. If a car arrives with no driver, send it to the far lot. Don't let it park near the rooms. That's not where it belongs. Rule 7. If you find an unaddressed postcard in the mailbox, don't open it. The invitation is already written. Don't be curious. Rule 8. Never leave the motel before dawn. You might leave, but you won't stay gone. I was still staring at the postcards when a voice behind me made me jump. They're important, you know. More important than you can imagine. I spun around to find an elderly man standing in the doorway to what looked like a back office. He wore a cardigan despite the heat, and his eyes had that glazed, faraway look I remembered from visiting my grandfather in the nursing home. But there was something else in those eyes, a kind of desperate intensity that made me want to look away. "Jesus, you scared me," I said, trying to catch my breath. "Are you Mr. Harrison? We spoke on the phone about the job?" He shook his head slowly, a sad smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Harrison's been gone a long time now. I'm just the caretaker." "Frank." He didn't offer his hand. "You must be Daniel Sullivan." "Danny," I corrected him automatically. "About these rules." "Follow them," Frank cut me off. To the letter. No exceptions. He shuffled forward and placed a ring of brass keys on the desk. "Your shift starts at midnight. The rules will explain everything else." He turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Danny? The postcards. Don't ignore them. They're how it spreads. How what spreads?" But Frank was already gone, the back office door clicking shut behind him with a finality that made my stomach turn. I spent the next few hours familiarizing myself with the front desk systems, which consisted mainly of the ancient ledger and a cash register that looked like it belonged in a museum. The ledger itself was fascinating in a morbid way. Pages and pages of guest signatures stretching back decades, some of them accompanied by strange notations I couldn't decipher. Around 11:30 p.m., the bell above the door chimed. I hadn't heard any cars pull up, which was my first warning that something wasn't right. A woman stepped in wearing a red windbreaker that seemed too heavy for the desert heat. She was thin, almost gaunt, with hollow cheeks and dark circles under her eyes that looked like bruises. She clutched a small leather bag to her chest, like it contained her last possession in the world. "Welcome to the Blue Swallow," I said, trying to sound professional despite my growing unease. "Checking in?" She nodded without speaking, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for hidden threats. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Room 3, please. It has to be room 3. I checked the ledger. Room 3 was available, but something about her insistence made me nervous. The last entry for room 3 was from 3 months ago, and next to it was one of those strange symbols I'd noticed earlier. Something that looked like a spiral with an eye in its center. "Can I get your name for the register?" "Marie," she said. "Marie Collins." She placed a stack of crumpled bills on the counter. "I'll pay cash. And..." She leaned in close enough that I could smell something metallic on her breath. "If I knock on your door tonight, don't open it, no matter what I say or how much I beg. Promise me." I swallowed hard. "I promise." She snatched the key from my hand and hurried down the hallway, the bottom of her windbreaker dragging along the floor like a shadow given weight. I watched her disappear into room 3, the door closing with a finality that made my stomach turn. After she left, I examined the bills she'd given me. They were old, 1950s series, and the paper felt wrong somehow, too soft, like money that had been washed too many times. But they were real enough according to the counterfeit pen I found in the desk drawer. I wrote her name in the ledger, and, as I did, I noticed something odd. The ink seemed to spread and bleed into the paper, forming tiny tendrils that reminded me of blood vessels. I blinked, and the effect was gone. Just my imagination, I told myself. Just nerves. At 11:55 p.m., I went outside to turn off the neon sign as per Rule 1. The desert night was cool and still, with only the faintest whisper of wind. The moon hung low and swollen on the horizon, casting long shadows across the parking lot. As I reached for the switch, I noticed something odd about the old Pontiac GTO. It seemed to have moved slightly, as if someone had pushed it a few inches to the left. But that was impossible. The thing looked like it had been there for decades, its tires flat and rotting. Still, when I walked over to check, I saw fresh scrape marks in the asphalt beneath its wheels. I killed the neon and hurried back inside, trying to shake off the feeling that something was watching me from the darkness beyond the lot. Behind the desk, I found another postcard that hadn't been there before. This one was blank except for a single word written in what looked like rust-colored ink: soon. The first sign that something was wrong came at exactly 12:38 a.m. I remember the time precisely because I was staring at the old clock on the wall, watching the second-hand tick with a rhythm that seemed just slightly off. When I heard it, a soft scratching from the parking lot, like claws on concrete. It's just a coyote, I told myself. The desert's full of them. But the scratching grew louder, more deliberate. It sounded like something dragging itself across the asphalt, something heavy. Metal scraped against ground, and my mind flashed to the Pontiac. Had it moved again? Then came the voice, small and plaintive. "Help me. Please, it hurts." It was a child's voice, but wrong somehow, like hearing a familiar song played slightly off-key. I gripped the edges of the desk until my knuckles turned white, remembering Rule 5. Ignore animal noises from the parking lot. Coyotes shouldn't sound like children crying. "Daddy?" the voice called out. It sounded exactly like my daughter, Emma. "Daddy, why did you leave us? Why did you make Mommy cry?" I squeezed my eyes shut, my heart hammering against my ribs. It wasn't Emma. It couldn't be. Emma was safe in Chicago with Sandra. This was just my guilt playing tricks on me, or something worse. Something that knew how to use my fears against me. The crying continued for what felt like hours, gradually mixing with other sounds. Scraping metal, whispered conversations in languages I didn't recognize, and once, horribly, the sound of my own voice calling for help. At 1:15 a.m., I heard a knock at room 3. When I checked the security monitor, an ancient CRT screen that showed grainy black and white footage, I saw Marie standing in the hallway, knocking on her own door from the outside. But that was impossible. I hadn't seen her leave her room. I switched to the camera, showing the interior of room 3. And why did we have cameras inside the rooms? I hadn't even questioned that when I saw the monitors. Marie was there too, sleeping on the bed. The Marie in the hallway kept knocking, her movements becoming more frantic. Then she turned toward the camera, and I saw that her face was just wrong. Like someone had tried to draw a face from memory and gotten all the proportions slightly incorrect. I switched off the monitor. The knocking continued for exactly 3 more minutes, then stopped abruptly. When I dared to look at the monitor again, the hallway was empty. At 2:15 a.m., the phone rang. We didn't have a working phone line. I'd checked earlier when trying to get cell signal. But it rang anyway, the old rotary phone on the desk rattling against the wood. Against my better judgment, I answered it. "Blue Swallow Motel," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Danny?" It was Sandra's voice. "Danny, what did you do?" "Sandra? How did you—" "The collection is coming, Danny. It's coming because of what you did. What you're going to do." "I don't understand." "Yes, you do." Her voice changed then, becoming deeper, inhuman. "You always understand too late." I slammed the phone down, but it kept ringing. I pulled the cord from the wall, but it kept ringing. Finally, I opened the desk drawer and shoved it inside, muffling the sound with a stack of old phone books. That's when I noticed the ledger had fallen open to a new page. All the entries were in my handwriting, but I hadn't written them. They listed check-in dates for the next week, the next month, the next year. All the guests had the same name, Daniel Sullivan. At 2:45 a.m., a new sound cut through the cacophony of impossible noises, the deep, throaty rumble of a V8 engine. Through the front window, I watched a 1955 Cadillac Coupe de Ville glide into the lot. The car was pristine, its black paint gleaming like wet ink under the moon. But as it pulled closer, I realized with growing horror that there was no one behind the wheel. The Cadillac rolled to a stop, its headlights aimed directly at the lobby windows. I remembered Rule 6. If a car arrives with no driver, send it to the far lot. Don't let it park near the rooms. That's not where it belongs. My hands shook as I reached for the PA microphone. "Take the last spot at the end," I managed to say, my voice cracking. The Cadillac's headlights blinked twice, an acknowledgement that made my skin crawl. Then, as if guided by an invisible hand, it rolled slowly toward the far edge of the lot. As it passed under one of the parking lot lights, I noticed something that made my blood freeze. The license plate read Sullivan. Before I could process this, I heard a door open behind me and spun around to see Marie from room 3 standing in the hallway. She looked even worse than before, her skin waxy and pale, almost translucent under the fluorescent lights. "It's starting," she whispered. "The collection. It's almost time." She held up her hands, and I saw with horror that they were slowly becoming transparent, like ice melting in reverse. Through her fading flesh, I could see the bones of her fingers, and beyond that, the wallpaper behind her. "What's happening to you?" I asked, backing away. "The same thing that happens to all of us," she said. "We become part of it, part of the collection, just like you will." "What collection? What is all this?" She smiled sadly, and I could see through her teeth to the back of her throat. "Check the ledger. Your name is already there. Has been since before you arrived." I looked down at the guest book, and there it was. My signature on a check-in form dated 6 months ago, written in my handwriting but in ink that seemed to shimmer and move on the page. When I looked up again, Marie was gone. Her red windbreaker lay crumpled on the floor where she had been standing. With trembling hands, I began to flip through the ledger's pages. Each entry seemed to tell a story, but not in the usual way. Beside the names and dates were notes, symbols, and sometimes what looked like warnings. James Peterson, room 7. Do not give him room 3. Linda Martinez, room 12. She brought it with her, Michael Chen. Room 3. He opened the postcard. The entries went back decades, but certain patterns emerged. Room 3 appeared more often than any other, usually accompanied by those strange symbols. And every few pages, I found my own name, written in different hands, on different dates stretching back to before I was born. A note fell out from between the pages, a yellowed piece of paper folded into thirds. The handwriting was jagged, desperate. The collection grows. Each piece we leave behind becomes part of it. Our memories, our belongings, our very essence. The motel is a mouth, and we are what it devours. But it needs a curator, someone to manage the inventory, to send out the invitations. P.S. Check your wallet, Danny. The postcard was always there. My hands shaking, I reached for my wallet. There, between old receipts and credit cards I could no longer use, was a postcard I'd never seen before. It was blank on both sides, waiting to be written. That's when the lights began to flicker. At 3:10 a.m., movement caught my eye, something being slipped through the mail slot in the front door. It was another postcard, but this one seemed to move of its own accord, sliding across the floor like a living thing. Rule 7 echoed in my mind. If you find an unaddressed postcard in the mailbox, don't open it. The invitation is already written. Don't be curious. But curiosity has always been my downfall. It's what made me peek at other traders' positions, what led me to place those first desperate bets, trying to recover my losses. And now, despite every instinct screaming at me to leave it alone, I found myself walking toward the postcard. My fingers trembled as I picked it up. The paper felt wrong. Too warm, like it had been sitting in someone's pocket rather than the cool night air. There was no address, no stamp, just a single sentence written in flowing script. Thank you for accepting the invitation. The collection begins now. The lights flickered, and the temperature in the room plummeted. Outside, shadows began to move and coalesce into impossible shapes. They emerged from the darkness like a nightmare given form. Twisted, impossible figures cobbled together from the abandoned belongings of guests long gone. A creature made of leather jackets and hiking boots stumbled forward, its head a battered suitcase with a broken zipper that opened and closed like a mouth. Another, constructed entirely from watches and jewelry, clicked and ticked as it dragged itself across the parking lot, hundreds of hands marking different times. I saw Marie's red windbreaker among them, now part of a towering figure that pressed itself against the lobby window. Through the glass, I could see her face forming and dissolving in the fabric, her mouth moving in silent screams. The old Pontiac GTO creaked to life, its rusted body reshaping itself into something that was no longer a car, but wasn't quite anything else either. It moved like a wounded animal, dragging itself across the parking lot on wheels that had become legs, its headlights glowing with a sickly yellow light. Panic gripped me as I remembered Frank's words. The postcards. They're how it spreads. The stack of blank postcards still sat on the desk, innocuous as snake eggs waiting to hatch. With shaking hands, I grabbed one and a pen. The creatures pressed against the windows, their patchwork bodies casting impossible shadows. I could hear the glass beginning to crack. Sandra's face flashed in my mind, not as she looked the last time I saw her, tired and disgusted, but from our college days. Her smile bright and trusting, her whole life ahead of her, before I ruined everything. "I'm sorry," I whispered, and began to write. 2. Sandra Sullivan, 1847 Lakeshore Drive, Chicago, Illinois, 60611. My pen hesitated over the message portion. What could I possibly write? What words could prepare her for what was coming? The window cracked further, a spiderweb pattern spreading across the glass. Through it, I could see Marie's face in the windbreaker creature, her expression a mix of pity and hunger. Finally, I wrote, "The collection has chosen you. I'm so sorry." I shoved the postcard into the mailbox, and everything stopped. The creatures froze mid-motion, then began to retreat, melting back into the shadows as if they had never been. The cracked window repaired itself, glass flowing like water until it was whole again. My phone buzzed, the first signal I'd had all night. A tracking notification. Postcard sent to Sandra Sullivan. Below it, another message appeared. "Thank you for your contribution to the collection. Your debt has been noted." The words began to shift and change as I watched. "The curator position has been filled. Training begins tomorrow night." I stayed until dawn, as per rule number 8. As the sun rose over the desert, things began to look almost normal. The Pontiac GTO was back in its spot, though its rust pattern seemed different, forming shapes that looked almost like faces if you stared too long. Frank appeared from the back office, looking exactly as he had the night before. "You survived," he said. It wasn't a question. "I sent it to my ex-wife," I admitted, the words burning my throat. "I sent this curse to the mother of my child." Frank nodded slowly. "Better her than you, right? That's what you told yourself?" He shuffled closer. "That's what I told myself too, 40 years ago, when I sent it to my brother." He rolled up his sleeve, revealing skin that seemed to shift and change, sometimes transparent enough to see the bone beneath. "The collection always needs a curator, Danny. Someone to manage the inventory, to send out the invitations, to keep the cycle going. What happens now?" "Now?" Frank smiled, his teeth suddenly looking too sharp. "Now you learn the real rules, the ones we don't write down. Your training begins tonight. And Sandra? She'll receive her invitation soon. Maybe she'll be smarter than we were. Maybe she'll burn it without opening it." He shrugged. "But they never do. That was 6 months ago. I'm still here at the Blue Swallow, learning the true nature of the collection. Every night, I watch new guests arrive, each drawn by their own desperation, their own need. Some are running from something, others running towards something. It doesn't matter. The collection takes them all eventually. I've learned to recognize the signs, the slight tremor in their hands when they sign the register, the way their eyes dart around the room as if seeing things that aren't there yet. I've learned to read the symbols in the ledger, to understand the patterns of the collection's hunger. Sandra never called or texted to say she received the postcard, but 3 days ago, I saw her name in the ledger, written in that shifting, living ink. She'll be here soon. Room 3 is already waiting for her. I've thought about warning her, about breaking the rules to save her. But the collection doesn't allow that. I know because I've tried. The words turn to ash in my mouth. The phone lines go dead. The emails delete themselves. The best I can do is hope she's stronger than I was. Hope she makes better choices. But mostly, I watch the neon sign flicker in the desert night, attracting lost souls like moths to a flame. I file their belongings when they leave them behind, categorizing each piece for the collection. I send out the invitations, choosing who lives and who becomes part of the growing mass of memories and lost things that haunts our parking lot. Because that's what curators do. We maintain the collection. We keep the cycle going. We make the hard choices so we don't have to face the consequences of our own invitation. If you're reading this, consider it my confession. But more importantly, consider it a warning. If you ever find yourself on Route 66 and see the sign for the Blue Swallow Motel, keep driving. And if you receive a postcard with no return address, for God's sake, don't open it. Some invitations are better left unanswered. Some collections are better left incomplete. And some debts can never be repaid.